I want to tell you about an experience that really changed my life in yoga, and it was an injury. So I did a lot of Ashtanga yoga in the 90s, and I'm not trying to say there's anything wrong necessarily with Ashtanga, but what motivated me a lot back then was what I call endpoints in the pose. So was my chin on my shin in Paschimottanasana, and this is the system that I was part of. Were my hands clasped in certain poses? Did I have my foot behind my head? And even if I had my foot behind my head, that was the end point, that was the goal of the pose, and my back was sore the next day or my neck was sore, it didn't really matter as long as I got my leg behind my head. And in retrospect, that's just crazy, and that's not the reason why we need to do alignment. And if you go down that path, sure, you can get your leg behind your head and you may get the approval of others, but eventually you'll probably end up injuring yourself. And I learned this lesson the hard way. The story dates back to about 1999, 2000, and in Maui, Hawaii. I used to do yoga when Patabi Joyce came there for our Ashtanga conferences. And, I was a strong windsurfer, surfer, a tight body, and there was a pose that I'd been working on for quite a long time called Marichiasana D. Now you basically bring one knee up to the sky, and you bring another leg in half lotus, this left one, and then you take your hands around and you clasp them behind the back. And again, I told you I was motivated by endpoints. My teacher was motivated by endpoints at that time. So what mattered was my knee on the floor, that was in half lotus, and were my hands clasped. And what happened was when I was doing the pose, my knee was up off the floor as I was trying to bind in half lotus until my adjuster, and by the way, I'm never blaming anybody, I was a willing participant, not a victim. I didn't say no, stepped on my knee, and then my knee was on the floor. And then as I was reaching my hands around, this knee was up in this air, my right knee, and I got my hands together because someone pulled them hard together, and I couldn't believe the feeling of when my hands finally clasped. I've been trying that pose for so long, and my ego side was stoked. My ego side was so excited. I'm like, oh my God, I've been trying this pose and the guru got me into it. This is amazing. However, the next day and for the preceding 2 months after that, I couldn't walk. So I was a little bit less stoked after that. I did major ligament damage to my knee. I literally couldn't put any pressure on it. I was limping. And I don't think I would be doing this course. I don't think I'd be on this path if it wasn't for that injury. So it's a great story in the sense of how it's the negative experiences, it's the challenges that we face, and we're as a culture in this really challenging time right now, that really help us to grow if we let it. So what happened is is that I sought out the teachers that I mentioned, Joya in particular, and they helped me to feel things totally differently in the poses, the way the forces went through the body physically. And really, now our tagline for this course is that yoga is a feeling and not just a shape. And so I really learned how to create a feeling in that, in her classes. Now, in particular, back to my own therapy, what I had to learn was that the endpoints, when it comes to alignment, don't matter as much as you think. They're still important, again, just so we're clear on what an endpoint is. An endpoint would be, let's say you're doing revolved triangle, and does your right hand go around the left foot? Is it on the floor? When you're in Paschimottanasana pose, seated forward fold, is your chin on your shin? When you're doing bird of paradise pose, are your hands clasped. When you're doing revolved prayer and clasping your hands, the clasping of the hands becomes important to a lot of people, even though they are doing things that are really not good on their joints. So this is what I mean by being motivated by endpoints. So you'll see when you do this alignment work that was my hard lesson, to let go of that. All right, so how did I rehab myself from my injury? My knee ligaments were blown. And what I had to do was abandon all hope. Literally, I gave up on the thought that ever in my life would I ever do half lotus, full lotus, or even pigeon pose ever again. That just created too much pain on my knee. So, here's how I rehab myself. This may not look like a half lotus to you, but this, if I start to pull across the midline, creates a stretch in my outer hip muscles. So what I learned was, if I kept my knee stable and my ankle stable, so nothing distorted there, I'm like, oh, that's my pain-free place. Awesome. Now, if I can just bring my knee across the midline, and don't worry if it's not on the floor or on this chair in this case. Just bring it across the midline, pull this left hip back, tilt your pelvis forward. I'm like, there's this beautiful sensation of stretch in my outer left hip. And I like that feeling of stretch. It was like having a massage. And instead of being motivated by, again, knee on the floor, knee stacked, whatever, I just was like, oh, this feels so good right here. I'm just going to breathe into that. And you know what happened? It wasn't fast. In fact, it was quite slow. But just being motivated by, oh, this feels so good, the sensation of opening in my hip, that as years, literally years passed, I started to realize that the way I was doing the pose in the first place was creating a lot of torsion in my knee joint. This shin was rotating out, my thigh was rotating out this way. It was basically prying my knee joint like you would eat a Thanksgiving turkey. Sorry for the vegans. I believe in veggie food, but I'm just giving you an analogy of like prying this knee open and creating stress on this joint. So I realized that's the way I was doing it for so many years. The forces of the load, let's say, wasn't going through the body in my knee in the right place for starters, and I wasn't getting the stretch as a result in this hip where I needed it in the first place. So here's what I'm saying is over time, gradually my knee came more and more and more across the midline without any uncomfortable sensation in my ankle or my knee. And I started to realize, I can do half lotus. I can do pigeon pose. I can do full lotus. And it just hit me in this yoga as a feeling and not just a shape, that this is the big thing we need to emphasize in our alignment is, can we be precise about where the stretch is supposed to occur and let go of being motivated by the endpoints. So it's, again, not that we don't want to get to the endpoints, it's just that we cannot compromise the health of our joints and our tissues, soft tissues, in order to get there. So we need to play the long game always. And what you'll find is that in that process, we will be more precise with where the stretch needs to occur or the strengthening. And as a beautiful benefit, it will be very, very, very hard to get injured in this practice if you do the poses in the way that I'm suggesting. Now, preventing injuries is a major thing for me because they're everywhere in yoga.